What's going
I'm
on?
just trying to find a pawn shop so I can sell my Cabbage Patch doll, Olympic Cabbage Patch dolls from 1984.
Picture half a square mile of downtown Los Angeles, boxed in by glass towers on one side and a freight rail yard on the other. On any given night, close to 4,000 people sleep inside those 50 blocks with nothing solid over their heads. That number comes from the county's own count, and outreach workers say the real total runs higher. But surviving here isn't random. It runs on rules nobody voted on, and on a decision made decades before today's residents were born. One we'll get to by the end, because it's still deciding where thousands sleep tonight. Jeff Page found that out the hard way. In August 2006, he arrived on Skid Row with 2 suitcases and nowhere else to go. He'd spent years in LA's hip-hop scene, producing records, working shows, before things fell apart. 15 years later, people on the block called him its unofficial mayor. He never left. He learned which rules actually kept a person alive down here, and he spent the rest of his life teaching them to whoever showed up scared and empty-handed. Imagine you're one of those newcomers. First night on the block. Nobody hands you a manual. The first rule you learn is where you're allowed to put your body down. Skid Row runs almost entirely on tents now, rows of them lining Town Avenue and San Julian Street. Tarps zip-tied to shopping carts for extra cover from the rain. A tent here isn't a home, though. It works more like a legal status than a shelter. City rules only allow sleeping on the sidewalk between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. Every morning, before the sun is fully up, you fold yourself and everything you own back off the concrete to avoid a ticket. Miss that window, and an officer can write you up for something as basic as lying down. No snooze button. No door that locks either. Some corners of the block still run on something close to a routine. A shop owner hoses down his stretch of sidewalk every morning around 8:30. Same corner, same hour. Like clearing a stage before the next show, by nightfall, the same stretch fills back up, tent by tent, because there's nowhere else for 4,000 people to go. You learn fast which corners are quiet and which ones aren't, which side of the street catches the morning sun through the towers, which alley smells like the trash trucks skipped it again. None of it is written down. It just gets passed person to person, the way Jeff Page passed it to whoever sat down near him. Food follows its own geography, and it has its own clock too. The Midnight Mission has served a hot meal on this stretch of downtown since the 1930s, including a full Thanksgiving dinner that's been running for close to a century. On a normal weekday, lines form outside missions and folding tables for blocks, some run by county programs, some by volunteers who showed up that morning with whatever they could afford. But timing matters as much as the food itself. Miss the window at one location and the next might be 40 minutes away on foot. That sounds manageable until you remember nearly everyone in that line is carrying everything they own on their back while they walk it, and 40 minutes on hot concrete in July is its own kind of cost. Sleep is a separate fight entirely. Apart from just finding a spot to lie down, Los Angeles nights drop into the 40s for much of the year, and a nylon tent wall does almost nothing to stop that kind of cold once it settles into concrete. You learn to sleep in layers, everything you own worn at once, a beanie pulled low because heat leaves through your head first. You learn to sleep light too, one ear tuned to footsteps. Theft is common enough that neighbors take turns staying half awake to watch each other's carts. Some nights the block is loud, arguments, sirens 2 streets over. Some nights it's quiet enough to hear the freight yard humming a block east, and that quiet is somehow worse because it means everyone around you is also just lying there, awake, waiting for the sky to lighten. Summer flips the whole equation. Downtown concrete holds heat long after the sun drops, so a 100-degree afternoon can still feel like 90 at midnight inside a tent with no airflow. Cooling centers exist a few blocks away, but they close by evening, right when the heat trapped in the sidewalk is at its worst. You learn to soak a shirt at a fire hydrant and drape it over your shoulders, because that's the version of air conditioning that's actually available to you. And every so often, word moves down the block that a bed opened up somewhere, an interim housing unit, a shelter with an actual mattress, and you find yourself doing math you never wanted to learn. County officials once put actual numbers on it. On an average day a few years back, roughly as many people fell into homelessness across Los Angeles as got housed out of it. County-wide totals have improved some since then, but nobody on this block mistakes that for the odds being good. So you take the numbers seriously when someone tells you a bed opened up, because you know exactly how rare that sentence is. Health is where the math turns brutal. Skid Row records the county's highest rates of HIV, drug overdose, and tuberculosis. Public health officials once traced 78 tuberculosis infections to this stretch of downtown, 11 of them fatal, spread partly through the same crowded conditions that make the sidewalk feel like a neighborhood. Still no door that locks, which means no way to isolate a cough, a wound, or a fever from the person sleeping 4 feet away. A cold that would keep you home from work for a day can turn into something that puts you in an ambulance out here. More than one Skid Row clinic has a name for what happens next. Patients discharged from a hospital bed straight back onto the same sidewalk they came from, sometimes with a month of pills and a printout of instructions, and nowhere private to read it. The county's approach to the drug crisis here shifted hard toward what's called harm reduction. Since a 2016 change in state law, publicly funded services can no longer require sobriety as a condition of help. Outreach teams now hand out naloxone kits and clean supplies to cut overdose deaths block by block. Doctors say it saves lives, and the county's own numbers back them up. Residents who've watched it up close for years will tell you something else is true at the same time. Open drug use became part of the block's daily weather, something you just walk through on your way to the mission line, whether you use or not, past a pipe on the curb or a needle cap in the gutter, the same way you'd step around a puddle. Then there's the part of surviving Skid Row that has nothing to do with staying alive and everything to do with staying in place. Sanitation crews clear encampments on a rotating schedule, trucks and officers moving block by block. Anything left behind when they arrive, a mattress, a photo, someone's only jacket, can legally be thrown out. In February 2023, crews tore down a canopy structure that had worked as an informal community hub for years, a spot residents called the White House, where people dropped off donations and hot meals for each other. It went into a truck like everything else on the sidewalk that day. Rebuild, get cleared, rebuild again. Ask anyone who's been here more than a year, and they'll tell you that cycle wears on a person in a way the cold and the hunger don't. Because at least the cold is honest about what it's doing to you. Jeff Page spent his last years fighting exactly that fight, arguing that people who'd lived on these same 50 blocks, longer than most city officials had held their jobs, deserved a real vote in what happened to their own neighborhood. He ran for a seat on the local neighborhood council, won it, and kept winning it for 6 years straight, then spent years pushing to form an independent Skid Row council, so residents weren't just talked about at City Hall, they were talked to. He helped put a mural up at 5th and San Pedro, just to put the neighborhood's name back on a wall the city kept quietly renaming out of official maps. He never got the council finished. He died in October 2021 from heart issues, still living 3 blocks from where he'd arrived 15 years earlier, carrying 2 suitcases and nothing else. Almost nobody outside these 50 blocks knows this part. None of it happened by accident. In 1975, city leaders made a formal decision. Instead of spreading homeless services across Los Angeles, they would concentrate them here, inside these same 50 blocks, in a policy planners at the time openly called containment. Keep the crisis manageable by keeping it small and visible, in one place, close to the missions and clinics that already existed, and far from the neighborhoods with the political weight to fight it off. 50 years and dozens of task forces later, county data suggests the strategy still basically works. Just not the way anyone promised back in 1975. Tent counts across Los Angeles have fallen by roughly half since 2021, driven by real housing placements and real money. But researchers tracking 3 LA neighborhoods found that by early 2026, nearly 9 out of every 10 tents still standing in their entire study area sat inside Skid Row, up from 6 out of 10 just 4 years earlier. The city didn't solve the tent problem, it moved it back to the same 50 blocks where the line was drawn half a century ago. The way water finds the lowest point in a room, no matter how many times you mop it. So you can put a number on Skid Row easily enough. Close to 4,000, sometimes more, depending on who's counting and when. What's harder to number is what holds inside that line every single day. Jeff Page used to tell newcomers the same thing on their first week. "This isn't a waiting room," he'd say, "it's a neighborhood. And neighborhoods take care of their own." He said it right up until the year he died, still without the council he'd spent 15 years trying to build. 50 years after that line was drawn on a city planning map, close to 4,000 people are proving him right anyway, feeding each other, watching each other's things, learning a system that was never built for kindness, and finding small pieces of it inside anyway. The real question isn't whether they're surviving, it's how many more years a city gets to call that survival a solution before somebody has to answer for the line it drew in 1975.